The thing about engine failures in deep space is that they always happen at the worst possible moment, usually when you're carrying a hold full of medical supplies to a war zone and running low on both fuel and patience. The stellar drifter had been making worrying noises for the past 3 days, sounds that suggested her plasma drives were held together by little more than wishful thinking and maintenance tape that was older than some of the wars being fought in this sector. Marcus Webb had named his cargo hauler after his tendency to drift between jobs without much concern for long-term planning, a habit that had served him well during his years as a freelance operator in the outer systems. Former Earth Federation communications specialist turned independent contractor, he specialized in delivering supplies to places other haulers considered too dangerous, too remote, or too politically complicated to bother with. Ketha Prime definitely qualified as all three. The planet hung in his forward viewport like a bruised jewel, its surface scarred by orbital bombardments and the kind of civil war that made news feeds back in Federation space but rarely inspired anyone to actually help. Princess Lyraliai's Royal Guard was fighting a losing battle against insurgents who had better weapons, more funding, and the backing of off-world corporations that saw opportunity in chaos. Marcus had taken the job because the pay was good and because someone needed to get medical supplies to the civilian population caught between the warring factions. He hadn't planned on his ship choosing this particular moment to remind him that regular maintenance was more than just a suggestion. "Come on, sweetheart," he muttered to his ship's AI, watching warning indicators flash across his control panel like an angry Christmas tree. "Just get us to the surface. You can have a complete breakdown after we deliver the cargo." The AI responded with what sounded like electronic indigestion, followed by the kind of silence that usually preceded expensive repair bills. The stellar drifter shuddered, dropped out of atmospheric entry vector, and began falling toward Ketha Prime with all the grace of a brick wrapped in regret. Marcus's emergency landing could generously be described as controlled, in the sense that he remained conscious throughout the process and the ship only exploded a little bit. He sat down in what his scanners indicated was an abandoned mining facility in the planet's northern mountains, far enough from the major population centers to avoid immediate attention from either side of the Civil War. "Well," he said to the empty cockpit, surveying the damage reports that covered his displays like a medical diagnosis for a terminal patient, "that could have gone worse. We could have crashed into something important." The mining facility turned out to be a sprawling complex of tunnels and processing equipment that had been evacuated months earlier when the war reached this region. Marcus spent his first day setting up a basic camp in what had been the facility's command center, using portable generators to power his emergency beacon and hoping that Federation rescue services would find him before either the Royal Guard or the insurgents decided to investigate the smoking crater that used to be his ship. His second day was interrupted by the distinctive whine of plasma weapons fire echoing through the mountain passes. Marcus climbed to the facility's observation tower, a structure that offered a commanding view of the surrounding valleys, and discovered that his quiet hiding spot had become significantly less quiet. Two groups of armed figures were engaged in what military tacticians would call aggressive negotiations, and everyone else would call trying to kill each other with energy weapons. Through his binoculars, he could see the distinctive bronze armor and four-armed physiology of Catharian Royal Guard soldiers taking cover behind mining equipment while a larger force of insurgents attempted to flank their position. The Royal Guard was outnumbered at least 3-1, and their defensive position was deteriorating rapidly. "Not my fight," Marcus told himself, settling back against the observation tower's wall. "I'm just a cargo hauler who happened to crash land in a war zone. Getting involved would be stupid, dangerous, and probably fatal." He watched the battle for another 10 minutes, noting the tactical situation with the analytical eye of someone who'd spent 5 years coordinating Federation military communications. The Royal Guard was commanded by a particularly large Catharian whose bronze armor was more elaborate than his subordinates, suggesting senior rank. The commander was wounded. Marcus could see the favoring of his left side that indicated damaged ribs, but continued directing his troops with the kind of calm competence that kept soldiers alive in impossible situations. The insurgents had better positioning and superior numbers, but they were making the classic mistake of assuming that overwhelming force was the same as tactical superiority. They were pressing their attack too aggressively, exposing themselves to counterfire in their eagerness to finish off the Royal Guard patrol. Still not my fight, Marcus repeated, though he found himself unconsciously calculating firing solutions and defensive improvements. I'm neutral. Switzerland in space. Just here to deliver medical supplies and fix my ship. The Royal Guard commander took a plasma blast to his shoulder, spinning him around and sending him stumbling behind inadequate cover. His subordinates immediately moved to protect him, but their defensive line was collapsing under concentrated insurgent fire. Marcus sighed, recognizing the expression his sister used to make when he brought home stray animals despite their mother's rules about pets. This is going to be really stupid, he muttered, heading for the observation tower's emergency controls. The mining facility's blasting charges were still connected to the central detonation system, designed to clear or deposits with controlled explosions. Marcus had spent enough time around demolition work to understand the basics of shaped charges and timing sequences. More importantly, he understood the psychological impact of sudden, unexpected explosions on people who were concentrating on shooting at each other. He set a timer for 30 seconds, then activated the facility's public address system. "Attention insurgent forces," he announced in his most authoritative voice, "you are trespassing on Federation property under the protection of the Terran Neutral Commerce Treaty. Withdraw immediately or face defensive action." It was complete nonsense. The Federation had no jurisdiction here, and there was no such thing as the Terran Neutral Commerce Treaty, but it sounded official enough to make people pause and think. 29 seconds later, the mining charges detonated in a carefully orchestrated sequence that sent columns of rock and dust shooting into the air between the two forces. The explosions didn't hurt anyone, but they created enough confusion and visual obstruction to break the insurgents' attack momentum. In the chaos that followed, the Royal Guard commander rallied his troops and executed a fighting withdrawal that would have impressed Marcus's old Federation instructors. They used the dust clouds for cover, maintained discipline under fire, and extracted their wounded with the efficiency of professional soldiers who'd done this before. The insurgents, rattled by the unexpected explosions and convinced they were facing some kind of Federation intervention, fell back to reassess the situation rather than pursuing through unknown terrain. Marcus watched from his observation tower as both forces withdrew from the immediate area, leaving him alone with the satisfaction of having helped without technically picking sides. It was the kind of elegant solution he preferred: maximum effect, minimum involvement, everyone lives to fight another day. He was climbing down from the tower when he heard the sound of approaching footsteps, measured, deliberate, and accompanied by the subtle hum of powered armor systems. The Royal Guard commander stood in the facility's main entrance, his bronze armor scorched and dented from the recent battle. He was tall even by Catharian standards, his 4 arms carrying weapons with practiced ease despite visible injuries. His face bore the kind of scars that came from years of combat, but his eyes held intelligence and something that might have been respect. "Human," the commander said in accented but clear Standard Galactic, "I am Captain Thane Voss of the Royal Guard. You provided assistance during our engagement with insurgent forces." "I set off some mining charges," Marcus replied carefully. Seemed like the neighborly thing to do. "I'm Marcus Webb, cargo hauler, currently dealing with engine troubles." Captain Voss studied him for a long moment, then did something that made Marcus's breath catch. The Catharian warrior came to full attention, his 4 arms moving in perfect synchronization as he rendered a formal military salute that was clearly ceremonial rather than casual. It wasn't the quick acknowledgement between soldiers. It was the deep, respectful bow reserved for nobility, for commanders, for people whose authority was recognized and honored. "The dead is noted," Captain Voss said, his voice carrying the weight of formal ritual. "Honor to the one who stands with Ketha." Marcus stared at the alien warrior, his mind racing to understand what had just happened. He'd helped some soldiers escape a bad tactical situation. Nothing more, nothing special, certainly nothing that warranted the kind of salute he'd just received. But Captain Voss's eyes held something that made Marcus's chest tight with unexpected emotion, the look of someone who had chosen to follow, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. "Captain," Marcus said carefully, "I think there might be some kind of misunderstanding here." Captain Voss's interpretation of misunderstanding apparently differed significantly from Marcus's, because 30 minutes later Marcus found himself riding in a Royal Guard transport vehicle that hummed with the kind of advanced technology he'd only seen in Federation military specifications. The Catharian warrior had politely but firmly insisted that Marcus needed protection, and that the safest place for him was the royal capital. "This really isn't necessary," Marcus said for the fourth time, watching the scarred landscape of Ketha Prime roll past through armored windows. "I'm just a cargo hauler who happened to be in the right place at the right time. I'll call for pickup from Federation Rescue Services and be out of your hair in a few days." "You intervened in combat to preserve Royal Guard lives," Captain Voss replied, his tone suggesting this was a significant fact that Marcus was somehow missing. "The debt cannot be dismissed easily. I set off some mining charges to create a distraction. It's not like I single-handedly turned the tide of your civil war." Captain Voss turned to look at him with an expression that suggested Marcus was being deliberately obtuse. "You could have remained hidden. Your ship's distress beacon indicates Federation registry. You have diplomatic immunity that would protect you regardless of battle outcomes. Yet you chose to act." Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his seat, which had been designed for someone with 4 arms and a significantly different skeletal structure than humans possessed. "Anyone would have done the same thing." "No," Captain Voss said quietly. "They would not." The certainty in his voice made Marcus look at him more carefully. The Catharian warrior's bronze armor was expertly maintained despite obvious battle damage, and his weapons were arranged with the precision of someone who'd been fighting for years. But there was something in his expression that spoke of battles lost as well as won, of help that hadn't come when it was needed most. "How long has this war been going on?" Marcus asked. "For years, 2 months, 18 days, Captain Voss replied without hesitation. "Since the off-world corporations began supplying insurgent forces with advanced weapons in exchange for mining rights." "And the Federation?" "Maintains official neutrality while Federation-registered companies profit from both sides." Captain Voss's tone remained professionally neutral, but Marcus caught the bitter undertone. "Princess Lyralii has requested assistance multiple times. The Federation Council expresses sympathy and suggests diplomatic solutions." Marcus winced. He'd heard this story before on other worlds, corporate interests trumping humanitarian concerns while politicians offered thoughts and prayers instead of actual help. "I'm sorry. That's not right." "Yet you helped," Captain Voss said. "Without profit motive, without political consideration, without obligation." Before Marcus could respond, their transport's communication system crackled with an urgent message. The voice belonged to another Royal Guard soldier, speaking rapid Catharian that Marcus's universal translator struggled to parse. Captain Voss's expression darkened as he listened, then he leaned forward to address the driver. "Change course. Refugee convoy under attack, grid reference 77 Alpha." "What's happening?" Marcus asked as their transport veered onto a rough mountain track that made his teeth rattle. "Civilian evacuation convoy," Captain Voss explained, checking his weapons with practiced efficiency. "Families fleeing insurgent raids in the eastern settlements. Intelligence indicates rebel forces have moved to intercept them." "Why would insurgents attack civilians?" "To demonstrate that the Royal Guard cannot protect the people," Captain Voss said grimly. "Fear is their most effective weapon." They reached the attack site 15 minutes later, arriving to find a scene that made Marcus's stomach clench with anger. A convoy of civilian vehicles had been forced off the road and into a defensive circle, while insurgent forces fired on them from elevated positions in the surrounding rocks. Most of the refugees appeared to be families. Marcus could see children huddled behind makeshift barricades while their parents tried to shield them from weapons fire. Standard suppression pattern, Captain Voss ordered his troops over the communication system. Establish overwatch positions and provide covering fire for civilian extraction. Wait, Marcus said as Royal Guard soldiers deployed from their transports. The insurgents have superior positioning. A frontal assault will just get people killed. Captain Voss paused in his tactical preparations. You have alternative suggestions? Marcus studied the battlefield with the analytical eye he developed during his Federation service. The insurgents had made the same mistake as before, they'd focused on overwhelming firepower rather than tactical flexibility. They're concentrated in those rock formations, he said, pointing to the rebel positions. But they're assuming the refugees can't fight back effectively. What if we give the civilians something to work with? Explain. Those transport vehicles have emergency power cells, right? And the refugee convoy includes mining equipment from the settlement evacuation? Captain Voss's 4 eyes brightened with understanding. Improvised defensive barriers. Exactly. We help them create proper cover while your soldiers provide suppression fire from multiple angles. The insurgents will have to divide their attention between targets instead of concentrating on the civilians. Working together, Marcus and Captain Voss coordinated a defense that combined Royal Guard tactical expertise with improvised engineering. Marcus helped the refugees position their vehicles and mining equipment to create interlocking fields of cover, while Captain Voss's troops established firing positions that forced the insurgents to expose themselves to counterfire. The battle was fierce but brief. Faced with organized resistance and effective cover, the insurgent force broke off their attack and withdrew rather than risk significant casualties for minimal gain. In the aftermath, as Royal Guard medics treated wounded civilians and prepared the convoy for continued evacuation, Marcus found himself surrounded by grateful refugees. Families whose children he'd helped protect pressed small gifts into his hands, carved trinkets, handwritten notes, pictures drawn by young artists who wanted to remember the human who'd helped them when they needed it most. "You are not what I expected," Captain Voss said, watching Marcus awkwardly accept thanks from a young Catharian girl whose parents had been wounded in the attack. "What did you expect?" "Federation citizens typically observe our conflicts with detached interest," Captain Voss replied. "You engage personally." "These are people," Marcus said, looking at the families preparing to continue their journey to safety. "Children who just want to live without being shot at. How could anyone stay detached?" Captain Voss studied him for a long moment, then rendered that same formal salute Marcus had received at the mining facility. This time, however, other Royal Guard soldiers noticed and began offering their own respectful acknowledgments, not casual military courtesy, but genuine recognition of someone they considered worthy of their respect. "Captain," Marcus said quietly, "why are your soldiers treating me like I'm someone important?" "Because," Captain Voss replied, "you are. You simply do not realize it yet." As they resumed their journey toward the royal capital, Marcus found himself thinking about the refugees' faces, the children's drawings, and the weight of respect he hadn't asked for but somehow earned. He was beginning to suspect that his simple plan to deliver medical supplies and repair his ship had become something significantly more complicated. Through the transport's windows, he could see more Royal Guard vehicles joining their convoy, additional protection that suggested Captain Voss considered his passenger valuable enough to warrant substantial resources. "Captain," Marcus said, "exactly where are you taking me?" "To meet someone who will be very interested in the human who chooses to help rather than simply observe," Captain Voss replied. "Princess Lyralii has been hoping to meet Federation citizens who understand that neutrality is sometimes another word for complicity." Marcus settled back in his seat, realizing that his accidental involvement in Ketha Prime's civil war was about to become significantly less accidental. The respectful looks from Royal Guard soldiers, the formal salutes, the protection detail, all of it suggested that he'd somehow become important to people whose opinions mattered. He wasn't sure he was ready for that kind of responsibility, but looking at the faces of the refugees they'd helped save, he was beginning to think that being ready might be less important than being willing to try. The royal palace of Ketha Prime rose from the capital city like something carved from living stone and optimism, its soaring spires and graceful arches somehow managing to look both ancient and impossibly advanced. Marcus had seen Federation architecture that attempted similar feats of artistic engineering, but none had achieved the harmonious blend of beauty and function that characterized Catharian design. "Impressive," he said as their convoy approached the palace gates, which were guarded by Royal Guard soldiers whose armor gleamed despite obvious signs of recent combat. Princess Lyreliai's ancestors built it to inspire hope, Captain Voss explained. The idea was that people would see beauty enduring through difficulty and remember that civilization is worth defending. Does it work? Most days, Captain Voss replied. Today remains to be seen. The palace's interior maintained the same blend of elegance and practicality, with wide corridors that could accommodate both ceremonial processions and the rapid movement of military personnel. Marcus noticed that many of the decorative elements had been reinforced or modified for defensive purposes: beautiful tapestries that concealed armor plating, artistic alcoves that provided cover during potential firefights. Princess Lyrelii received them in what Captain Voss identified as the Tactical Planning Chamber, a room that managed to serve as both throne room and military command center. Maps of Ketha Prime covered the walls alongside displays showing troop movements, supply routes, and casualty reports. In the center of it all stood a woman who radiated the kind of authority that came from making life-and-death decisions on a daily basis. She was tall, even by Catharian standards, her 4 arms moving with precise grace as she reviewed tactical information with her advisors. Her bronze skin bore the same ritual scarification that marked Captain Voss as a warrior, but hers were more intricate, suggesting both noble birth and personal combat experience. When she looked up at Marcus's entrance, her eyes held intelligence, determination, and something that might have been desperate hope. "Your Highness," Captain Voss said, rendering the same formal salute Marcus had received twice now, "I present Marcus Webb of the Earth Federation, who provided assistance during our engagement with insurgent forces." "Assistance," Princess Lyrelii repeated, studying Marcus with the analytical gaze of someone accustomed to evaluating people quickly and accurately. "Captain Voss's report indicates you intervened in combat to preserve Royal Guard lives, then coordinated civilian defense during a refugee convoy attack." "I helped some people who needed help," Marcus said, feeling increasingly uncomfortable with the formal atmosphere. "It wasn't anything special. Wasn't it?" Princess Lyrelii gestured to the tactical displays around them. "In 4 years of war, exactly 3 Federation citizens have offered assistance to my people. 2 were journalists who wanted dramatic footage for their reports. You are the first to risk personal safety without expectation of profit or recognition." She moved closer, and Marcus caught a glimpse of the exhaustion she carried beneath her composed exterior. "Tell me, Marcus Webb, what do you see when you look at my world?" Marcus glanced around the room, taking in the maps marked with battle sites, the casualty reports, the faces of advisors who looked like they hadn't slept properly in months. "I see people fighting to protect their home from enemies who have better equipment and more resources. I see a war that's been going on too long, with too many casualties, while outside powers profit from the conflict instead of helping to end it. And what do you think should be done?" It was clearly a test, though Marcus wasn't sure what the correct answer was supposed to be. He decided honesty was probably his best option. "I think the insurgents are being used by off-world corporations who want access to your mineral resources. I think those corporations are counting on your people being too exhausted to resist effectively. And I think the Federation's official neutrality is just political cover for allowing corporate exploitation." Princess Lyrelii exchanged glances with Captain Voss, who nodded slightly. "An accurate assessment. Unfortunately, accurate assessments do not win wars against opponents with superior firepower." Before Marcus could respond, alarms began wailing throughout the palace. Emergency lights bathed the tactical center in red illumination while automated voices announced incoming threats in urgent Catharian. "Multiple contacts on approach vector," one of the princess's advisors reported. "Large formation, moving fast. Estimated time to palace perimeter, 18 minutes. Insurgent forces?" Captain Voss asked. "Negative. Energy signatures indicate off-world technology. These are the mercenary companies we've been tracking." Princess Lyrelii's expression hardened with grim determination. "They're making their move. The insurgents must have provided them with intelligence about our defensive capabilities." Marcus watched the tactical displays as enemy formations moved across digital maps like a plague of locusts converging on the capital. "How many?" Enough to overwhelm our defenses if they coordinate effectively, Princess Lyralii admitted. Our weapons are designed for fighting insurgents with captured equipment, not professional mercenaries with military-grade technology. What about evacuation? And abandon my people to corporate occupation? Princess Lyralii's voice carried the steel of someone who'd made similar decisions before. No. We fight here, with what we have. The next few minutes passed in controlled chaos as Royal Guard commanders coordinated defensive positions while palace staff prepared for siege conditions. Marcus found himself swept along in the organized urgency, his Federation military background automatically engaging as he processed tactical information and defensive preparations. Your communication systems, he said to Princess Lyralii as explosions began echoing from the city's outer districts. Are they compatible with Federation encryption protocols? Limited compatibility, she replied, monitoring incoming reports from Royal Guard units throughout the capital. Why? Because I spent 5 years coordinating Federation military communications, Marcus explained. If I can interface with your command network, I might be able to improve coordination between your defensive units. Princess Lyralii looked at him with sharp interest. You would do this? These mercenaries are attacking civilians to advance corporate interests, Marcus said, watching tactical displays that showed enemy forces systematically destroying infrastructure. That's exactly the kind of thing the Federation is supposed to prevent. If my government won't help, I will. Working together, Marcus and the Royal Guard communications specialists managed to integrate his Federation protocols with their existing systems, creating a command network that allowed Princess Lyralii to coordinate defenses across the entire capital with unprecedented efficiency. The battle that followed was fierce and desperate, with mercenary forces using advanced weapons to systematically break down the palace's outer defenses. But Marcus's communication improvements allowed Royal Guard units to respond to threats with coordinated precision that surprised their attackers. They're adapting faster than our intelligence predicted, Captain Voss reported during a brief lull in the fighting. These mercenaries have experience fighting Federation-equipped forces. Which means they know our tactics, Princess Lyralii said grimly. They'll adjust their strategy to counter our communication advantages. Marcus studied the tactical situation, his mind racing through possibilities and scenarios. The mercenary forces were professional, well-equipped, and experienced. The Royal Guard was brave, determined, and fighting for their home. But courage and determination had limits when facing overwhelming technological superiority. Your Highness, he said, what if we don't try to beat them conventionally? Explain. They're expecting to fight the Royal Guard using standard defensive tactics. They've probably planned for improved communications and coordinated resistance. But they haven't planned for fighting someone who knows Federation technology from the inside. Princess Lyralii's eyes sharpened with interest. You have a proposal? I do. But it would require a small strike team getting very close to their command ship, and the mission would be extremely dangerous. Captain Voss stepped forward, his 4 arms moving to check his weapons with practiced efficiency. Define the mission parameters. Marcus looked at the Catharian warrior, seeing determination and trust in equal measure. Infiltrate their command vessel, disable their coordination systems, and create enough chaos to break their attack formation. And you would lead this mission? Princess Lyralii asked. I know Federation technology and encryption protocols, Marcus said. I'm the logical choice. Captain Voss came to attention and rendered that formal salute again, this time in full view of Princess Lyralii and her entire command staff. It would be an honor to serve under your command, Marcus Webb. One by one, other Royal Guard officers present began offering their own salutes. Not casual military courtesy, but the deep, respectful acknowledgement reserved for leaders they chose to follow. Marcus stared at the room full of alien warriors treating him like someone worthy of their loyalty, and realized that his simple plan to deliver medical supplies had evolved into something he'd never expected, the responsibility of leadership, earned not through rank or authority, but through the trust of people who believed he would make decisions worth following. All right, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Let's go save your world. The mercenary command ship hung in Ketha Prime's upper atmosphere like a technological predator, its hull bristling with weapons arrays and sensor equipment that represented the cutting edge of corporate military hardware. Marcus studied it through his cargo hauler's modified sensors, noting defensive capabilities that would have impressed Federation naval architects and intimidated anyone with functioning survival instincts. "Remind me again why we thought this was a good idea," he muttered, making final adjustments to the Stellar Drifter's jury-rigged cloaking system, a combination of legitimate stealth technology and creative electromagnetic interference that might fool their sensors long enough to get close. "Because," Captain Voss replied from the co-pilot's seat, his 4 arms moving across Royal Guard tactical equipment with practiced efficiency, "conventional assault would result in unacceptable casualties, and your expertise with Federation technology provides our only advantage." "Right. No pressure at all." The strike team consisted of Marcus, Captain Voss, and 4 Royal Guard specialists chosen for their experience with infiltration operations. They'd spent the past 2 hours reviewing the mission plan, which could generously be described as controlled improvisation, and more accurately termed, extremely dangerous wishful thinking. Approaching optimal insertion point, Marcus announced, watching his improvised stealth system strain to mask their approach from increasingly sophisticated sensor sweeps. "Everyone ready for the worst idea in military history?" "I have participated in worse ideas," Captain Voss said calmly. "Though admittedly not many." The Stellar Drifter slipped through the mercenary ship's defensive perimeter like a ghost made of hope and desperate engineering. Marcus's modifications to the cloaking system held just long enough for them to dock with what appeared to be a maintenance airlock, hidden among the forest of external equipment that covered the command vessel's hull. "Phase 1 complete," he whispered into his communication headset. "Princess Lyralii, we're aboard the enemy ship." "Acknowledged," came the reply from the Palace Command Center. "Royal Guard forces are prepared to exploit whatever disruption you can create." The mercenary ship's interior reflected the same aggressive functionality as its exterior, corridors designed for efficiency rather than comfort, lighting that prioritized tactical readability over aesthetics, and security systems that suggested its builders expected to fight enemies with Federation-level technology. Standard corporate military layout, Marcus observed as they moved through service passages toward the ship's command center. "I recognize the design from Federation intelligence briefings. These ships are built for intimidation and overwhelming firepower, not extended operations." "Meaning?" one of the Royal Guard specialists asked. "Meaning their command systems are centralized for maximum efficiency, which makes them vulnerable if you can access the right control nodes," Marcus explained. "Also meaning they probably have enough firepower to glass your entire planet if we mess this up." "Encouraging," Captain Voss said dryly. They reached the command center's external access points without encountering serious resistance, finding the ship's security focused on external threats rather than infiltration by small teams. Marcus began interfacing with the mercenary communication systems, his Federation encryption protocols allowing him to penetrate defenses designed to resist conventional attacks. "I'm in their command network," he reported, watching data streams that represented the coordination of an entire mercenary fleet. "They're using corporate standard military protocols, which means I can understand their operational structure." The data flowing across his interface painted a picture that made Marcus's stomach clench with anger. The mercenary operation wasn't just supporting the insurgents, it was orchestrating the entire conflict, prolonging the war to maximize corporate profits while both sides bled resources that would eventually be harvested by off-world interests. "Princess," he whispered into his communicator, "you need to see this. I'm uploading intelligence data that shows the full scope of corporate involvement in your civil war." "Received," Princess Lyralii's voice carried new steel. "This confirms our worst suspicions. End this, Marcus." Working with desperate efficiency, Marcus began implementing a cascade failure in the mercenary command systems, not just jamming their communications, but introducing subtle errors into their targeting systems and coordination protocols that would compound over time. His Federation training had included extensive education in electronic warfare, knowledge he'd never expected to use in defense of an alien world against corporate exploitation. "Command disruption in progress," he reported. "But they're starting to detect the intrusion. We need to plant the physical charges and get out before." Alarms began wailing throughout the ship as automated security systems finally identified the infiltration. Emergency lighting bathed the corridors in red illumination while blast doors sealed critical sections against unauthorized access. "So much for the subtle approach," Captain Voss observed, checking his weapons as the sound of approaching security forces echoed through the ship's corridors. The fighting that followed was fierce but brief. Royal Guard training and Federation tactical knowledge proved superior to mercenary security protocols, allowing Marcus's team to plant explosive charges at critical system nodes while fighting their way back toward their extraction point. "Charges armed," Marcus announced as they reached the stellar drifter. "Detonation in 60 seconds. All teams, execute breakthrough assault," Princess Lyralii ordered over the communication network. "Strike while their coordination is disrupted." Marcus's ship detached from the mercenary vessel just as the charges exploded, sending cascading system failures throughout the command ship that left it dead in space with no ability to coordinate the fleet's operations. Below them, Royal Guard forces launched coordinated attacks that exploited the confusion to devastating effect. The mercenary fleet, stripped of central command and facing unexpectedly effective resistance, began withdrawing from Ketha Prime's orbital space rather than risk additional losses without clear tactical advantage. "Victory," Captain Voss announced, his voice carrying satisfaction and something deeper, the relief of someone who'd fought a long war and finally seen hope of its ending. 3 days later, Marcus stood in the palace's throne room as Princess Lyralii formally addressed representatives from across Ketha Prime. The hall was filled with Royal Guard officers, civilian leaders, and refugees who'd returned to reclaim their homes now that the immediate threat had passed. "The mercenary threat has been eliminated," Princess Lyralii announced, "but the victory belongs not to any single individual, but to all who chose to stand together against exploitation and oppression." She turned to Marcus, her expression carrying gratitude and something that might have been affection. "Marcus Webb of the Earth Federation, your actions preserved our independence and exposed the corporate conspiracy that threatened our world. In recognition of your service, I offer you the title of Ketha's champion, with all the honors and responsibilities that entails." Marcus looked around the throne room at faces that had become familiar over the past weeks, Captain Voss and his soldiers, refugees whose children drew pictures of the human who'd helped them, palace staff who treated him like family despite his alien origins. "Your Highness," he said carefully, "I'm honored by the offer, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for that kind of responsibility." "Leadership," Princess Lyralii said, "is not about being the right person. It's about being willing to stand up when others need someone to follow, regardless of your own doubts or fears." Captain Voss stepped forward and rendered that formal salute one final time. "It has been an honor to serve under your command, Marcus Webb. Whatever path you choose, know that you have earned the respect of warriors who judge by actions rather than words." Marcus felt the weight of their trust, the responsibility of leadership he'd never sought but somehow found himself carrying. He thought about his cargo hauler waiting for repairs, about the simple life of making deliveries and avoiding complications. Then he looked at the faces around him, people who'd fought beside him, who'd trusted him with their lives, who'd shown him that sometimes being ordinary wasn't enough when extraordinary circumstances demanded more. "I accept," he said, "on one condition. I want to establish a liaison program between Ketha Prime and the Federation, helping other worlds resist corporate exploitation. This shouldn't happen to anyone else." "Agreed," Princess Lyralii said, her smile carrying genuine warmth. "Though I suspect your Federation service record is about to become significantly more interesting." 6 months later, Marcus stood on the observation deck of a new ship, not a cargo hauler, but a vessel designed for diplomatic missions and humanitarian operations. Captain Voss served as his military advisor, their partnership having evolved into genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared experience. Intelligence reports indicate 3 more worlds facing similar corporate pressure, Voss reported, reviewing mission data with the thoroughness that made him invaluable. The Federation Council has approved our intervention proposals. Good, Marcus said, watching the stars will pass as they traveled toward their next assignment. How many Royal Guard volunteers for the new mission? More than we have ship space for, Voss replied. Word has spread about the human who chooses to help rather than simply observe. Many wish to serve under your command again. Marcus smiled, thinking about how his simple plan to deliver medical supplies had transformed into something he'd never expected, a life dedicated to standing beside those who needed help, earning the right to be followed not through rank or authority, but through the character demonstrated when it mattered most. Set course for the Aldrin system, he ordered. Let's go remind some corporations that not everyone can be bought or intimidated. As their ship jumped to hyperspace, Marcus reflected on the salute that had started it all, Captain Voss's formal acknowledgement not of rank or position, but of someone worth following into whatever challenges lay ahead. He'd learned that true leadership wasn't about commanding others, but about earning the right to stand beside those who chose to trust you with their hopes, their lives, and their future. The universe was full of people who needed help. Marcus Webb, former cargo hauler turned champion of the oppressed, was finally ready to provide it.